She had my fence bulldozed. That was the sight that smacked me in the face the second I turned onto my street. I froze, foot still pressing the brake, mouth hanging open, because where there used to be a gorgeous, century-old black iron fence, now there was just a mess of mangled steel, busted concrete, and Karen, standing there like she just planted a national forest, sipping iced tea with a smirk that could curdle milk. Well, it's about time someone did something, she chirped as I got out of the car, beaming like she'd just cleaned up the whole town. That rusty monstrosity is finally gone. You're welcome. I just blinked. She wasn't nervous, not even a little rattled. Nope, she looked thrilled, positively glowing with self-righteousness. Karen, our unofficial neighborhood dictator and proud president of the HOA, had apparently decided to launch a one-woman war while I was out of town for the weekend. What she didn't realize, what was about to hit her like karma on a freight train, was that she hadn't just flattened a fence. She had just committed a federal offense by demolishing a nationally protected historical landmark. And that was a whole different level of stupid. Just 5 days earlier, things were calm, quiet, even. If you ignored the usual HOA propaganda about what shades of beige were legally allowed on a mailbox. I lived in a family home passed down to me by my great-uncle, a historian, preservationist, and a man who practically worshipped antique metalwork. The house itself looked like something out of a vintage novel. Gothic revival architecture, stained glass, a quirky turret, and a vibe that probably included a ghost or two. But the crown jewel? That iron fence. It wrapped around the yard in graceful black iron arcs, decorated with ornate fleur-de-lis and hand-pounded rosettes, each rivet crafted by a Civil War-era blacksmith, whose great-grandson still gave history tours around the block. Folks loved it. Tourists would pull over just to snap pictures. History buffs came from out of state just to walk past it. Even the local historical society featured it proudly in their visitor pamphlet. But not Karen. Oh no, Karen saw that fence as a personal insult. From the moment I moved in, she treated it like I'd parked a UFO on the lawn. She claimed it violated the HOA's visual harmony clause, a term she made up, by the way, and she used it to bully anyone who didn't conform to her perfectly bland suburban fantasy. Karen didn't just hate originality, she saw it as a threat. And what really boiled her blood? Being ignored. And I had ignored her. Not rudely, just effectively. She came knocking once with a printout of fence colors she thought blended better with the community vibe. Spoiler alert, they were all various shades of oatmeal. I smiled, thanked her, closed the door, and never mentioned it again. That was my first mistake. My second, underestimating just how unhinged Karen was willing to get to prove a point. At first, it was little things. A formal letter from the HOA about my excessive fence height. I responded with a copy of the certificate from the National Historic Registry. Radio silence. Then came the fines. $50 a day for not complying. My lawyer actually laughed. They can't enforce that, he said. Your house was here long before the HOA existed. Just ignore her. But Karen, she didn't ignore me. She cranked it up. Suddenly I was getting anonymous complaints every week. My hedges were too bright, my doormat was too playful, and apparently I was dragging down property values because someone took a selfie on my sidewalk. I thought it was just Karen being her usual power-drunk self. I didn't realize she was plotting something far worse. The night before the disaster, I packed an overnight bag and headed out for a weekend conference. Locked the gates, left the porch lights on, didn't think twice about it. But while I was gone, Karen saw her chance. She called an emergency HOA meeting. Naturally, I was never informed and pushed for urgent corrective action on my fence. Nobody pushed back. Half the board were her hand-picked minions, and the rest were just too tired to argue with her anymore. By sunrise, she'd hired a demolition crew and signed the paperwork herself. She even baked muffins for the workers. They didn't question a thing. She told them I'd given verbal permission. They brought in a bulldozer. So when I rolled into my driveway that sunny Sunday, it felt like I'd pulled into the aftermath of a small-scale war. The air was thick with sawdust and the tang of hot steel. My fence was gone, tossed in a pile at the curb like someone's broken trampoline. And there was Karen, decked out in designer sandals, oversized sun hat, clipboard in hand, grinning like she'd just won the HOA Hunger Games. "You'll thank me later," she said. That thing was dragging the whole block down. I couldn't speak. Not yet. I walked over to the scrap heap, staring at the twisted remains of something my uncle and I had polished together when I was 12. One of the rosettes was bent like a pretzel. I slowly turned toward her. "Do you even realize what you've done?" She gave a dismissive laugh. "Please, I did the community a favor. That thing was ancient." My heart was hammering, not just from rage, but from the sheer insanity of what you pulled off. This wasn't petty vandalism. This was the destruction of federally recognized property. I pulled out my phone and started snapping photos. Karen rolled her eyes. "Oh, stop being so dramatic," she said. "If you had a problem, maybe you should have shown up to the meeting." I stared at her. "You mean the meeting you conveniently forgot to tell me about?" She said nothing. The workers started loading up their gear. I got the name of one of the guys and took a photo of the signed work order with Karen's scrawled signature on it. Then I called my lawyer. He picked up on the second ring. When I told him what happened, the chuckling stopped fast. "Wait, that fence was listed on the National Register?" "Yep, she bulldozed it." Dead silence. "This is big, like felony big. We're talking minimum 10 grand in federal fines, and that's not even touching state penalties." I looked over at Karen, who was now yelling at another neighbor about the length of their grass. She had no clue the storm she'd just unleashed. That evening, I filed a police report. The officer flipped through the paperwork and let out a whistle. "You said it was protected?" I nodded. "There's literally a plaque on the gate post." "Or there was. She demolished that too." He shook his head slowly. "We're gonna need to bring in the feds." And just like that, the gears of justice began turning. The next morning, Karen opened her front door to find a federal investigator waiting on her porch. And for once in her HOA-crowned life, she was speechless. That fence wasn't just some rusty barrier. It was history, a legacy. It had survived over 100 years of weather, wars, and time, only to be leveled because it didn't fit Karen's neutral color scheme. What Karen failed to understand, what she never saw coming, was that legacies don't go down without a fight. And when you bulldoze history, sometimes history bulldozes back. I got hit with not one, not two, but 3 fresh violation letters in 5 days. The first accused me of displaying unapproved seasonal decor, a tiny pumpkin on my porch in November. The second claimed my 50-year-old mailbox was aesthetic pollution and needed to be replaced with something more community appropriate. And the third, a $250 fine for apparently encouraging non-residents to loiter, referencing some tourists who'd paused to snap a few pics of the mangled fence remains. At that point, it wasn't just petty, it was psychological warfare. She wasn't enforcing rules, she was baiting me to lose my cool. But I didn't bite. I stayed calm, smiled through gritted teeth, and filed every violation letter like it was evidence in a courtroom drama. Then I sent the whole pile to my lawyer, who was now building a legal dossier thick enough to qualify as a small novel. Meanwhile, I started talking to neighbors, quiet chats, casual mentions, feeling things out. Turns out I wasn't Karen's only target. Mr. Bradshaw, 2 doors down, got slapped with fines for daring to grow tomatoes. Mrs. Kaplan, across the way, had her beloved garden gnome confiscated. Karen said it with unauthorized yard decor. And Elena, the sweet young mom on the corner, her toddler once drew on the sidewalk with chalk and Karen reported it like it was a criminal act, complete with photo evidence and a full write-up. This wasn't community management. This was suburban tyranny, clipboard edition. But here's the thing. The fence incident shook people. For the first time, folks were no longer whispering. They were talking. I started getting anonymous notes in my mailbox. Stories poured in. Residents fined for paint colors, holiday wreaths, mismatched patio chairs. Some were threatened with legal action if they didn't comply. Karen's power wasn't just annoying, it was oppressive. But now, her grip was slipping. She'd messed with the wrong antique. At this point, I didn't just want revenge. I wanted regime change. But before I went public, I needed all my legal ducks in a row. So I headed back to City Hall and dug into the archives. Property records, zoning codes, HOA charters. That's when I struck gold. Turns out my house and 5 others on the block had all been built before the HOA even existed, according to the documents. Historical properties that predate the HOA are fully exempt from its structural rules. Translation? My fence wasn't just legal. It was HOA proof. Armed with that smoking gun, I had my lawyer send Karen a cease and desist letter, so sharp it could cut concrete. Her response? Another violation notice. This time, she accused me of weaponizing legal jargon to destabilize neighborhood unity. I laughed so hard, I nearly framed that one. It was becoming pretty clear Karen thought her rules carried more weight than federal law. And honestly, I started to suspect she didn't actually understand how deep in it she really was. Most folks would start sweating bullets after getting a visit from federal investigators. Karen, she planted more tulips and threw a tea party for her loyal minions. No joke, she actually hosted an HOA garden gathering like she was the Duchess of landscaping. Luckily, I had an inside man. Let's call him Tyler, a longtime neighbor who somehow scored an invite to the party. He later told me it felt less like tea and more like a backroom strategy session. Karen, apparently red-faced and ranting, went off about entitled homeowners with eyesore properties destroying her vision for the neighborhood. She even pitched the idea of creating a new rule, a historical exception clause that would override all existing protections. Of course, that's not a thing. But since when has legality ever gotten in Karen's way? That night, a new notice popped up on the community bulletin board. It announced an upcoming special HOA vote. Topic: Neighborhood beautification and standardization, which in Karen speak basically meant more restrictions, less freedom, retroactive excuses for bulldozing anything that wasn't beige. She was rewriting history, dressing it up in red tape, and hoping nobody noticed the bulldozer marks. I knew I couldn't stop the vote by myself, so I went full campaign mode. I designed flyers exposing her greatest hits, from the Garden Gnome SWAT raid to the chalk incident that shook the cul-de-sac. I printed side-by-side photos of the destroyed fence and its historical registry listing, dropped a copy in every mailbox, even offered to give a slideshow at the next community potluck. At first, people were hesitant. Karen had always worn the mask of protector, keeping the HOA orderly and uniform. But facts hit harder than charm. And once they saw the receipts, the tide turned fast. Then 2 days before the vote, Karen made her next move. A construction crew showed up at my property, holding a work order to remove non-compliant lawn features. I asked to see the paperwork. It was unsigned. I called the company. They said the request had come directly from the HOA president. I stepped onto my porch, phone in hand, recording. Told them if they touched a single thing, they'd be explaining themselves to a judge. They left in a hurry. I posted the video that night. It exploded online. By morning, the headline was everywhere. Suburban HOA showdown. Historic fence demolished in power struggle gone viral. Karen hated attention the way a vampire hates sunlight. She built her little HOA kingdom behind closed doors, feeding off confusion and intimidation. But now, the spotlight was on her, and she was tripping over her own clipboard. Still, she wasn't about to crawl away quietly. On voting day, Karen strutted in wearing pearls, heels, and that signature smug grin, like she was about to accept the Nobel Peace Prize for nonconformity. She brought with her a stack of glossy proposals, bound, color-coded, and dramatic enough to make it look like she was unveiling a 5-year plan for world domination. Except this time, nobody clapped. Nobody smiled. The room was stiff and silent, the air thick with tension. Then something incredible happened. People weren't scared anymore. They were mad and wide awake. One by one, the neighbors came up and resolutely threw their ballots, as if to say, "No, we will not allow it." Karen's hands shook. She cracked jokes, threw on fake charm, tried to play it off like this was all just neighborhood fun. But nobody bit. The results came in. Her little dictatorship in disguise got obliterated. It wasn't even close. It was a vote by fire hose level rejection. That night, Karen posted a meltdown disguised as a message on the HOA website. She claimed foreign agitators had influenced the vote and declared the whole thing null and void due to external manipulation. No one replied. No one cared. She could feel her grip slipping, and the panic was setting in. She thought she could rewrite rules, erase the past, and crush anyone who pushed back. But history's got a long fuse and an even longer memory, and now she was permanently etched into mine. Karen probably figured her stubborn grin could outlast reality, but truth doesn't care about appearances. It comes armed with receipts, timestamps, legal notices, and it does not blink. That machine was rolling toward her now, and she was about to find out it didn't have brakes. I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd step back, maybe even mutter an apology, but that would have required self-awareness. Instead, she called a press conference. No kidding. She dragged a folding table onto the neighborhood lawn, slapped a homemade banner across it that read, "Community Preservation Committee," and handed out cupcakes like she was running a county fair. With cameras rolling, she claimed she was the real victim of a fence hysteria smear campaign. She said I'd forged the historical documents and was using dirty tactics to dethrone her glorious leadership. At that point, I was convinced she'd detached from reality entirely. Unfortunately for Karen, the Department of the Interior doesn't take bribes in the form of baked goods. The feds came back the following week, and this time, they weren't just asking nicely, they brought briefcases. They started requesting HOA records, everything from meeting notes to financial reports and email logs. Karen, still clinging to her pearls and pride, tried to delay things with some wild excuse about deep cleaning the office. She even claimed some documents had been accidentally shredded. That's when things crossed from sad to straight-up criminal. The agents weren't just investigating a fence anymore. Now they were digging into everything. With my lawyer's help, we filed a formal request for a forensic audit of the HOA's finances. And, oh man, when the books came back, it was like Christmas morning for a federal prosecutor. In just 4 years, the HOA had collected over $82,000 in fines, supposedly for community enhancements. But those enhancements, well, let's just say the math didn't add up. One expense, labeled Neighborhood Wellness Project, turned out to be a luxury hot tub. Another, called Emergency Aesthetic Fund, yeah, that was a $6,500 landscaping bill for Karen's front yard. There were receipts, bank statements, credit card charges, all leading back to one person with a clipboard and a God complex. Word spread fast. Neighbors who used to stay quiet were suddenly very, very loud. This wasn't about fences anymore. It was about fraud. Karen had been draining their wallets, bullying them with bogus rules, and defacing historical property in the process. People started packing into HOA meetings like it was a courtroom drama. They wanted answers. Karen tried to shout them down, to brush it all off as a misunderstanding. But the tone had shifted. Every sentence she uttered sounded hollow. Every excuse landed like a wet tissue. Meanwhile, the feds were still digging. The Department of the Interior sent an official to inspect the damage. He walked the perimeter with a clipboard and a frown, snapping photos like he was cataloging war crimes. He told me the fence had been part of a historic landmark trail for over 25 years. Its destruction? That wasn't just illegal. It was a violation of federal preservation law. That meant felony charges, not just for Karen, but possibly for every single person who helped carry out the demolition. The crew that had done the job turned on her almost instantly. Their managers submitted a sworn statement saying they'd been duped, shown fake paperwork, and told the owner, me, had given the go-ahead. They even attached a photo of the work order and taped to it a post-it note in Karen's handwriting. Urgent, owner verbally approved. That sticky note, that was the smoking gun. My lawyer blinked twice and almost dropped his coffee. That single note proved Karen had orchestrated the whole thing and that she knew she was breaking the law. Her inner circle on the HOA board started bailing fast. One stepped down with a public apology. Another claimed ignorance and tried to shift blame like it was a hot potato. Only one holdout remained, Darlene, who once gave out parking tickets to guests during a baby shower. Even Darlene looked like she'd rather be anywhere else when the news vans rolled in. The story hit local news like a meteor. The station aired a dramatic 4-part exposé. They interviewed neighbors, ex-board members, even the head of the Historical Society. Each segment ended the same way. Slow zoom on the demolished fence and the burning question. Who gave the? Karen still hadn't owned up. Her statements were vague, slippery, full of nonsense about collective vision and shared community responsibility. But no one was buying it anymore. You could see the unraveling in her eyes. She stopped walking her dog, stopped posting HOA updates. That smug little smile, now it twitched like a glitching robot. Then came the letter, stamped and hand-delivered from the Department of Justice. Karen was officially under investigation. Charges included destruction of federally protected property, financial misconduct, and obstruction of a federal investigation. She tried to slam the door in the agent's face. Didn't work. That night, they brought her in for questioning. And for the first time since this saga began, Karen didn't have a single word to say. Karen didn't get arrested, at least not yet. But the moment she was escorted into that unmarked federal SUV, our block transformed into TMZ. Phones came out. People whispered with popcorn-level energy. There were smirks so wide you'd think someone had won the lottery. I stood on my porch, sipping coffee like I was watching the season finale of a drama I didn't ask to star in. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could actually breathe. Not because anything had been fixed. The fence was still gone, a pile of twisted metal and memories dumped by the curb. But because someone like Karen, someone who'd built a throne out of fear and fine print, wasn't getting away with it. The days that followed, absolutely surreal. With Queen Karen temporarily dethroned, the HOA basically imploded. Meetings got canceled, notices stopped showing up, and a few people started panicking like the neighborhood would spiral into chaos. But something better happened instead. Without the constant threat of Karen's clipboard of doom, neighbors started talking again. Really talking. Not just polite nods, but actual conversations. People shared lemonade, offered to mow lawns, even brought cookies to my door to say, "Thanks for taking on the dragon." It was like the entire block had been holding its breath, and now we were finally exhaling. But it wasn't over. The legal machine was still grinding. There were hearings on the horizon, depositions scheduled, lawyers circling. Still, every step forward made the truth louder than the lies. Karen had tried to rewrite history with red tape and scare tactics. She thought she could silence dissent with imaginary rules. But now, those same rules were crumbling, and she couldn't hit undo. She hadn't just lost her grip on the HOA, she lost the narrative. And once the truth settled in, not even Karen could bulldoze it out of the way. The air without her, it felt like spring after a 5-year winter. People let their grass grow a little wild. Mailboxes popped up in colors other than approved beige. And kids, they came back to the sidewalks with chalk in hand, sketching dinosaurs and suns without fear of getting a citation. It was like we remembered we were a neighborhood, not a gated experiment in HOA surveillance. And the weirdest part? People actually started helping each other. They loaned tools, traded plants, swapped stories. Karen had ruled through fear. But once she was gone, we realized what we really needed wasn't control, it was connection. With the HOA in complete disarray, the residents decided to hold an emergency town hall to talk about what came next. I thought maybe a dozen people would show up. Instead, we ran out of chairs in 10 minutes. They lined the walls, buzzing with one big question. Who's going to clean up Karen's mess? Nobody wanted another dictator. What they wanted was transparency, accountability, someone who wouldn't go full clipboard crusader the second they got a little power. And somehow, in the middle of that chaos, my name kept getting tossed around. Me, the guy who just wanted to sit on his porch and be left alone. Apparently, standing up to Karen had turned me into some kind of neighborhood legend. Before I could even protest, they voted, right then and there. No speech, no prep. They just handed me a clipboard and said, "Congrats, you're the new HOA president." I didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or run. But deep down I knew, if I didn't step up, someone like Karen might someday step right back in. So I accepted, and I made myself a promise. We were going to rebuild everything she tried to destroy, together. Step 1, transparency. We published every HOA record online. Budgets, votes, meeting notes. We added a suggestion box that actually got read out loud at meetings. Yes, even the ones written in crayon. Shockingly, people got involved. They didn't just complain, they offered solutions. One neighbor suggested a community tool library. Another volunteered to teach weekend home repair classes. The place started transforming overnight, from suburban surveillance state to something that actually resembled a community. But there was one thing everybody agreed on. The fence deserved justice. Not revenge, justice. Not just an apology, but action. So we got to work. I contacted the Historical Society and locked in a grant for restoration. Neighbors came out to help clean the site, haul away debris, and prep the ground. Even a local blacksmith got involved. He'd heard the story and offered to recreate the original design, using the same historical techniques. Bit by bit, piece by piece, the fence came back to life just like the block around it. And when it was finally finished, we held a dedication ceremony. It stood tall, bold, proud, even more beautiful than before. We added a spotlight to keep it lit at night and installed a plaque telling the full story. How it was made, how it was destroyed, and how the neighborhood rose up to rebuild it. People clapped, some teared up. I gave a short, unscripted speech and thanked everyone for standing up when it mattered. Then someone shouted, "We should call it the Karen-proof fence." The crowd lost it. I hadn't heard that much laughter in months. Of course, Karen didn't show. Since the legal drama started stacking up, she'd gone full hermit mode. Her once manicured lawn was now a jungle. The house that used to scream power now just whispered foreclosure. A crooked for sale sign leaned sadly in the front yard, like even the pole had given up. Rumor was, she still lurked behind the curtains, watching the world move on without her. She wasn't feared anymore. She was pitied. And honestly, if that's not poetic justice, I don't know what is. But her shadow still lingered. A few weeks after the dedication, I found a letter in my mailbox. Typed, no return address. full of passive-aggressive whining about the new community garden lowering property standards, and a few barely veiled threats tossed in for flavor. I didn't need a signature to know who wrote it. I knew that tone. That was 100% certified Karen, trying to stir trouble from behind the curtain like a suburban Wizard of Oz. I chuckled, filed it under nonsense, but I didn't ignore it. Because people like Karen don't change. They just evolve. So we passed new bylaws. Presidents now had limited power. No one could serve more than one term. In major decisions, they required a quorum. No more secret meetings. No more forged approvals. No more tyrants. We didn't build a wall to keep Karen out. We built a system that made her obsolete. And just like that, the HOA, once her private empire, became the very structure that guaranteed she could never rise again. With the HOA finally back on solid ground and the community actually thriving, we started celebrating the small stuff. One neighbor threw the first block party we'd had in years. Somebody dragged out a karaoke machine. Kids jazzed up their bikes with streamers, and there was even a bounce house. Shockingly, no one got fined. At one point, someone wheeled out a cake shaped like the original iron fence, complete with fondant flowers and tiny chocolate rivets. It was hilariously over the top and completely perfect. That night, I sat on my porch, watching kids chase fireflies and neighbors swap jokes, and I felt something I hadn't felt in forever. Peace. Not the peace of quiet or isolation, but the deep kind. The kind that comes from finally feeling like you belong. Like the people around you aren't just nearby, they've got your back. That even when everything falls apart, it can be rebuilt, stronger, sturdier, together. My war with Karen may have started over a fence, but it unearthed something much bigger. It wasn't about metal or property lines. It was about power. What happens when someone has too much of it? It was about courage, how hard it is to stand up when you're the only one doing it. And it was about resilience, the quiet, stubborn kind that refuses to stay broken. Karen tried to steamroll over history, but in doing so, she woke up a neighborhood, and no amount of clipboards, bylaws, or beige-colored threats could ever undo that. Just when it felt like the dust had finally settled, when folks were starting to relax into the rhythm of post-Karen peace, she pulled one last rabbit from her tattered hat. She came back, not in person, not with speeches or surprise visits, but with the kind of sneaky nonsense only Karen could dream up. It started small. One morning, I opened my mailbox and found it crammed full of fake violation notices. Each one was more ridiculous than the last. Infractions for non-regulation porch lighting, unapproved curb appeal, and suspicious garden symmetry. No date, no seal, no signature. But the paper? Same stock. The font? Identical to her old notices. The tone? Vintage Karen. It was like receiving hate mail from a ghost who didn't know she'd been evicted. At first, I laughed and chucked them in a drawer labeled Delusions. But then Lisa down the block got hit with a warning about her wind chimes. Mr. Bradshaw got dinged for chaotic patio furniture alignment. Same mysterious notices, same passive-aggressive nonsense. No one on the board had issued them. No one even recognized the infractions. It was all Karen, lurking in the shadows, trying to stir up fear and confusion, hoping folks would fall back in line like the old days. But this wasn't the same neighborhood. We weren't the same people. We didn't just shrug. We got strategic. Someone mounted a camera near the community bulletin board. Another installed a motion detector on his porch. And within days, we got the smoking gun. A grainy video of a trench-coated figure in massive sunglasses skulking through yards at midnight, stuffing mailboxes with anonymous letters. It was so painfully obvious, it was almost sad. The video went straight to the neighborhood forum under the title, Karen's Comeback Tour. It spread faster than wildfire in a fireworks factory, and with it, whatever scrap of credibility she still clung to went up in smoke. But Karen, being Karen, she wasn't done. After her ghost letter campaign fizzled, she upped the crazy and filed a lawsuit against me. She claimed I'd caused her emotional trauma, slandered her reputation, and masterminded a conspiracy to destroy her life. Her lawyer looked like he'd been hired off a discount cereal box. The lawsuit read like it had been drafted by a caffeinated raccoon. Misspelled words, wild accusations, zero substance. But it still meant I had to show up in court. I wasn't angry, I was stunned. After all the chaos she'd unleashed, the fines, the fence, the federal agents, Karen had the audacity to claim she was the victim. She walked into the courtroom, wearing her classic beige power suit and a smile frozen tighter than a Botox ad. She tried to look poised, but the twitch in her left eyelid betrayed her. Her lawyer fumbled through opening remarks about psychological warfare and Karen's inability to plant tulips in peace ever since my so-called smear campaign. The judge nodded politely, then turned to my lawyer, who calmly slid a 4-inch thick binder across the table. "Your Honor," he said, "this is Exhibit 1A, the saga of Karen." Inside, screenshots of her fake notices, sworn affidavits from neighbors, bank statements showing her HOA embezzlement, photos of the destroyed fence, and best of all, the video of her midnight envelope drop-off, looking like an extra in a poorly budgeted spy movie. The judge flipped through the pages slowly. His eyebrows climbed with each turn. By the end, he didn't even bother asking for closing arguments. He looked up and said, "This is dismissed, and Ms. Witherspoon, you're fined for wasting this court's time." Karen's heels clacked furiously as she stormed out of the courtroom, like she still had dignity to preserve. No one followed her. No one offered a tissue. The woman who once ruled us with citations and side eyes now walked out completely alone. Back in the neighborhood, her house hit the market again. Someone taped a sticky note to the for sale sign, "Includes popcorn-worthy backstory." It stayed there for a full week before the rain finally washed it away. Kids started playing near her yard again. People stopped avoiding her block. That eerie silence that used to hover around her house, it was gone, replaced by the quiet hum of freedom. To officially bury Karen's reign, we threw another block party, this time bigger than ever. There were food trucks, bounce houses, face painting, and a massive banner that read, "Welcome back, Sanity." And yes, there was another fence cake, this one topped with edible rust flakes and frosting flowers. They even gave it a fondant plaque that said, "Rebuilt, not bulldozed." They asked me to say a few words. I walked up to the mic, looked out at this wild, wonderful group of people who used to just nod politely while living under the thumb of a petty tyrant. And I told them the truth. That fence, it was never just a fence. It was history. And when Karen destroyed it, she didn't just wreck metal, she tried to erase identity, legacy, voice. But what she didn't count on was that her bulldozer would wake up something way more powerful. Us. Funny thing about trying to silence one house, sometimes you end up waking up the whole street. That's exactly what Karen did. And when I finished my speech and stepped back, people clapped. Some of them clapped like they'd been waiting years to let it out. Then the DJ fired up a playlist, made entirely of songs that, ironically, would have violated at least 3 of Karen's noise ordinances. The mood? Pure freedom. Kids were dancing, dogs were barking, and not a single soul cared about community-approved decor. But the most surreal moment? That came weeks later. I was walking past the new fence when a small tour group pulled up and stopped in front of it. They stood in silence while the guide, a guy with a clipboard and an earnest tone, told the story. He talked about how the original fence had lasted over 100 years, how it was bulldozed by an overreaching HOA president who underestimated her neighbors, and how that same fence was brought back to life, not by some grant or agency, but by regular people who refused to let a bad decision be the final chapter. Then he pointed to the little plaque we'd installed under the gate. It read, "This fence stood against time and against tyranny, rebuilt not by one, but by many. May it remind us that power belongs to those who stand, not those who stand over." I stayed on the sidewalk, just out of view, listening as the group snapped photos and muttered their disbelief at the absurdity of it all. One woman leaned in and whispered, "Did someone really get arrested over a fence?" The guide chuckled. "Not arrested," he said. "Not yet. But this story, it's not finished." Boo! Karen's legacy had officially become folklore, a cautionary tale about unchecked authority and the chaos it leaves behind. But the rest of us, we'd written something better. A story about getting knocked down and rebuilding anyway. About standing up for what matters even when the odds are stacked against you. And yes, about getting just the right amount of revenge to make it satisfying. We weren't just a neighborhood anymore. We were something stronger, not bound by paperwork or HOA rules, but by what we'd been through together. If you liked this story, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below this video. We also recommend listening to the story about how Karen was stealing one guy's packages, so he decided to teach her a lesson and plan a package with revenge. Just listen to this story. You will be shocked what was in the box. To listen to this story, just click on the video box on the left. Thank you for watching.